By the end of this video, you're going to find out how to read an SLS 573 and to be able to understand what to take off and what to write in the description when you're measuring quantities. Hey guys, welcome back to Beyond the Measure. I'm a quantity graduate, passionate to share what I've learned so you guys can navigate the field easily. In this video, we're going to be tackling on how to read an SLS 573 and how to be able to write the description using the codes in the book. So, what is an SLS 573? SLS means Sri Lankan standards. So Sri Lanka standards are there for different types of industries, and the 573 indicates the building works and the measurements that are to be taken off for the building works. It's important to be able to read an SLS 573 and to be able to understand it, because let's go back to the basics. The first thing that you're going to be learning in measurements is to be able to find out what building elements are, and then later on to be able to take off from substructure to later on superstructure and MEP works. How are we going to be able to take off if we don't know how to read the SLS 573? So that's what we're going to be tackling today. From the SLS 573, not only can you read and get the descriptions for the taking offs that you're going to be doing in the TDS sheets, you can also find out the order or the levels of the works that need to be done. So you don't have to memorize the whole procedure. Using the SLS 573, you can actually understand the steps that you need to take in your construction field. So with me, I have a hard copy of the SLS 573. You can print it out on the PDF that you find online. I have the online version as well on my laptop right here. So I'll link that down below as well so you can download and go through it with me. So let me first record this for you guys. Okay, and I think you should be able to see it now. So you move on from the first method of measurements. So move on from the first page. And I'm sorry if you can hear the click. I don't know if that's useful or not, but I like using my manual mic instead of my pad. So you might be hearing the click as I'm scrolling through it. Can you please get to page number 3? I have my manual as well with me as my soft copy, so it's kind of easy for me to go through as I'm explaining it to you guys. So if you go to page number 3, you have the preamble of the document. So if you haven't watched my first video on the terms, then you might be confused on what a preamble is. So a preamble is where they give the general notes on what the document is going to be holding. So what's in there, the general notes and what it's about, you can find out all about it in the preamble. So in the preamble of the SLS, it kind of tells you when it was first published and who published it, who's associated with it, and what is the measurement handled in there. So moving on to the content section. As you can see here, there are different types of sections mentioned in the content itself. There's from A to, I am pretty sure, up to X. So there's A to X, and the letter I will be not available because I is confusing with the number 1. So we don't generally use the letter I. And that's pretty much it to be able to know what a content is. So you have section A, which is the general rules. They talk about kind of the basic rules and the ideas that you should have for some terms and for some work that you need to be doing. And then later on it starts with preliminaries, and then it's demolition and excavation and so on and so forth. So when you're describing something and you're writing the description, you're going to be using the first point of the code is going to be a letter. It depends on the letter of the section that you are using. And as you can see, the page number is also in coordination with the sections. So that's also really easy to find out where you are at the book. So I'm not going to be explaining each and every section and each and every part in section A in the general notes. But there are some common factors that you should know and read and find out. If you do guys have any kind of doubts, make sure to comment down below and I'll cover that up in another video. And another section that I wanted to mention in this video was the units. So if you go on to the last page of section A, you'll find the units section where they'll be mentioning how the units will be written. And make sure you follow to this. Make sure you are putting the correct simple letters. There are no capital letters at all. So KG is not capital K and G, it's small k and G. So make sure you know these things and you don't make those mistakes. This video is mainly for those who write the exams for their degrees. So make sure you're writing it correctly and not getting that wrong, which will later be really just silly mistakes on your paper. And if you can see, I'm here circling the example of the coding that they've written. So that's D111. I'm going to show you how you can write the D111 and what it means and where you're going to be writing it as well. So the first thing that we study as we go on to what a construction is and what a construction project holds of, the first thing that we learn is site preparation. So instead of mucking around with other sections, we're going to go straight to site preparation, and that's section D. As you can see, the page numbers will help you. D1 is the first page of section D. So how are you going to be reading a section in the SLS 573? So as you can see on the screen here, the first thing that you see is the section label, so that's section D, and section D is covering the sections for earthworks and excavation. So here, this in this double-lined box, it explains what the section will hold. So this section covers the method of measurements for excavation and earthworks, and this is for the building works. And this excludes the excavation made in section Q, W, and X. So Q, W, and X, those sections are for plumbing, drainage, and external works. So these sections of the excavation for them will be separately talked about in those sections. So we're going to be covering the other sections like foundation or any kind of underground works. Those excavations will be mentioned in this section D. So now please check out the columns that you have in this. So there will always be an information provided column, then a measurement rules column, a definition rules column, a coverage rules column, and a supplementary information column. Under the information provided, you will have the classification table. So the information provided only comes in the first page of the section. So it kind of explains what this level of section is going to be providing in a more deeper way. So for example, if we read this, the groundwater's level and the date when it was established, datum for levels, details for trivial pits and boreholes, including their locations. So these informations will be provided either in the located drawings or in any kind of the preliminaries of the project itself. Other than that, let's go on to the classification table. The classification table is where you're going to be dragging your description from. This is where you get the idea to how and what to measure in the when you're doing the measurement, taking off quantities. Of course, right now I'm going to be showing you an example on how you're going to get the code D111, and later on we'll do another example so you can understand a bit further. Before that, can we look at the 4 columns on the right? So there's measurement rules, definition rules, supplementary information, and before that, coverage rules. So if you look at the measurement rules, those will be the rules on kind of like a guideline on how you're going to be measuring the specific section. For example, if you can see in this page, M1, it means they are providing on how to measure a tree when you're finding the girth. So you have to measure it from below, from the ground up to the height of 1 meter. And that's how you provide the girth, and you find out the girth for what you're going to be finding out here in the 3rd column. The measurement rules kind of shows on how you're going to be measuring that specific item. And then if you go into the definition rules, the definition rules means a kind of an explanation on what the item is. For example, if you go down here in D2, you're going to be seeing that site vegetation is bushes, shrubs, and undergrowth. So that means when we are mentioning here site preparation on the 2nd row, clearing site vegetation, what do they mean by site vegetations? And if you go on to coverage rules, what does that include? So coverage rule is kind of what the whole item will be covering. So you can see here C1, this work is deemed to include grubbing of the roots and disposal of the materials and filling the voids. So these 3 things will be covered under the one item that we're explaining here as clearing site vegetations. And even as well here, removing trees. I'll explain that in a minute. Then you have the supplementary information. So supplementary information means any kind of additional things that haven't been mentioned in the previously stated rules. So here you can see S2 means filling materials described, which means when we're doing the description, we should mention what type of filling materials we're using, if any. Then let's go on to the horizontal lines. So now you know how to read the columns. How are you going to be reading horizontally? The lines horizontal, they separate each item or each section for each column. So as you can see, the site preparation, it kind of includes all three of what's coming next in the second column. Clearing site vegetation, removing trees and stumps, and protection and retention of existing trees, all three of them come under the one section of site preparation in the first column. Then we go on to the second section. So the second section, depending on where you're going with the horizontal line, within that line is what the section includes. So clearing site vegetation will be split under as description sufficient for identification, which means we have to write the description on what kind of site vegetation we're clearing and what is there, the area or whatever it is. So the girth and thereafter whatever these things are, they are not included in the clearing site vegetation. They are included in the removing trees and stumps section. So you kind of get the idea, right? Then we go on to the unit section. These units will not be mentioned in your code. You do not measure the unit column. So these units also, they are kind of the same thing. You check the horizontal line. So the meter squared, it only applies for clearing site vegetation section. If you can see under the horizontal line, you say number. So number is where we count. We're counting the units and the quantities are in number. So here, this number, it includes for removing trees and stumps as well as protection and retention of existing trees. So you can see this unit includes for these two sections because there's no horizontal line here splitting them apart. Then we go on to the fifth column. So the fifth column usually has, if there's any extra information that you need to add, if there's any extra categorizing there is to be done when you're selecting the item, the fifth column will be filled as well. If you go on and down below, you can see here as well. So there's no second column here, which will be mentioned as 0. And then we go on to the third column and then the fifth column as well. So here as well, you can see here, this is the first column is number 8 and the second column you have kind of two sections here. And then you have the third column, which is also two sections. Here it's empty, which will code as 0. And then here you can have either 1 or 2 as codes. And then you go into the fifth column. Here it's 0, there's nothing here. But then here you can see there's two options here. So these points, if needed, will also be specified. Okay, so now we kind of have an understanding on how to read the columns and how to read the horizontal lines. So now we know what to do to kind of find out the code. So the item that we're going to be following is clearing site vegetation. Later on we'll do on our concrete works. So where is the site vegetation? It's under site preparation, and site preparation is under the earthworks and excavation section, and that's section D. So you get yourself into section D. As you can see in the screen, I'm on section D, the first page, D1, excavation and earthwork, as we explained before. So now you're in section D. You know what you need to find. So the first thing that we're doing is site vegetation, so that's under site preparation. So the first column will be number 1. So we have D and then we have 1. Then we're going to go for the second column. So there's 3 options for us, and which one says site vegetation? The first one. So that's number 1. You have to check the number here. So D11. From D11, you can see there's only one option here, which is description sufficient for identification. So obviously that will be the section that you're going to be selecting. So that's D11 and 1. And here when you're doing the description, you have to explain what the site vegetation is about and what it's going to be related to. The next thing that you can find out, which I think is very clever to do, is check the units. So to get the site vegetation quantity, you have to use the unit meter squared as according to SLS 573. Instead of taking off measurements and taking off quantities and then later figuring out what's there in SLS, it's a great tip. I suggest you go through the SLS 573 first. So you kind of have an idea what you're going for and what kind of quantities you need to take. Because some people, they just do the quantities, they take off the measurements, they sometimes find out the volume of a room or something, and then they go and check the SLS and they realize as according to their description and as according to their code, the unit that they must measure in is meter squared. That's a waste of time, isn't it? So instead, to prevent that, just make sure you go and check the SLS 573 first, check the coding that you're going to go under, and check what kind of a unit that needs to be measured under, and then you can later measure and then get the description. So the first thing I would do is to check here D111, and you can see that's meters squared. So I'll go back to my drawings and my taking off sheets, and I'll take off the measurements, and then in meters squared I'll do an area, which is the length and the width of the site. So that will be the area of site vegetation. And later, once I've got the quantity, to write the description on the TDS sheet or the measurements sheet, you will then use the code. So how are you going to be writing the description? Do not, I repeat, do not memorize these codes, because there's so many codes and so many items that you need to know. It's impossible, literally impossible. Even if you're doing this for your exams or you're just studying for the semester, make sure you can understand how to do this anywhere at any time. So the first thing that you need to do is check what section you're under, and then later on check what parts you're going through. You can either just put a semicolon and just write the description as long as the reader can understand, or you can actually grammatically write this sentence. It doesn't matter as long as the description has the information that the reader needs. So normally what I would do is I would write excavation and earthworks, semicolon, and then I would write site preparation on clearing site vegetation and blah blah blah, depending on whatever you have information on your specifications. So that's how I would write the description. If not, you want it kind of in a grammatical manner, you can say clearing site vegetation for site preparation under the earthworks and excavation section for and blah blah blah. So you can see I kind of like twisted the order of what we are describing here, which can be a little bit confusing for some people, especially beginners. So I would recommend just using the order that we go. So how do you figure out if a tree comes under a site vegetation or a tree removal? This is where the other columns and the other sections be helpful. If you check out the definition rules under D2, it explains what a site vegetation is. They are shrubs, bushes, and undergrowth, hedges, and trees and stumps as well. But what? They should be less than 500 millimeters of a girth. So girth is like you get the circumference, the perimeter of the tree. So how do we measure that? That's under M1. Tree girths will be measured 1 meter height from the ground level, and you measure the girth from there, and then you'll find out the girth. If it's less than 500 or equal to 500, that will be taken under site vegetation, and if it's more than that, that will come under removing trees and stumps. I hope you're following me so far. If you have any doubts, make sure to put a comment down below and I'll respond to your question. So now you kind of know how to read the SLS 573 from the first page itself. So all the other sections, they're the same thing. They all have the same kind of point that you need to go through. Let's do another example, and I want you guys to go to section F, if I'm correct. So section F is for concrete works. And you can see under the section itself, there's another section called section F1. And F1 is for in situ concretes. So there's F2 as well, I think, precast concrete, and I'm not sure if there's any F3. You can check that in the contents page. So we're going to do an in situ concrete example for coding and description. In situ concrete means the concrete that's been made and formed in the site itself. Precast means the shape or the compartment of the element is already made in a external place, a manufacturing place, and they just bring it over for installation. So usually we do in situ concretes for foundations, beams, plinth beams, columns and stuff like that, and even slabs. We do it on the site itself. So that's in situ concrete. So let's do a very easy one. I want you to take out your SLS 573s. Follow me through as I'm explaining. Try to pause the video and get it done yourself first, and then you can check if you're correct or not. The item that you're going to be finding the code and description for is for one of the foundation works, and that's for screed. So we're going to find out the code, the description, and the unit that you should be measuring for screed works for a building that is rectangular in shape, and it's about 50 millimeters thick. So pause the video and try to do it yourself, and then you can follow me through on to the next. So you can take your time if it's your first time to read through the information section and the rules and definitions. It's kind of better if you do have an understanding on what's there. So if there's any specific ideas and notes that we need to know when we're taking off the quantities, it's easily there. So I'm going to be using my manual page first, and then I'll explain it on the soft copy. Screed is a part of the foundation part. So we have to check for foundation in the concrete section. So as we're going, I see foundation. There it is at the start itself. We go on to foundation. We have to go for the screed section. There it is. So that's at the start as well. And then we go on to finding out the third column. Is it mass concrete or reinforced concrete? So a screed is usually not reinforced. It's just a mass concrete, and it's a bit like, it's a small thickness. So we know that's going to be small thickness, and so it's mass concrete. And then we go on to the fourth column to find out the unit. So we haven't done the taking off yet. We're finding out the unit. And some people, they will go directly here and say that's numbers. No. As you can see, the first part of the first column is horizontally coming along, and it follows through onto column 4 and 5. So number is for the testing section. We have foundation underneath that, and that's meters squared. That means you have to find the area of the rectangle as we took as an example. Then number 5, column number 5, that's curved radii or other shapes stated. That means if it's a curved shape, you're going to be mentioning on the first part. If it's a rectangle or any other shape, you're going to be doing it on the second part. So now we know we have to take off measurements under an area. So we take off measurements under areas, and then we get the total, and now we have to write the description. This is page number F2 of SLS 573, and it's section F. You can find out foundation is the second point, and then you go forward to the next column, that's screed on the first point, and you go forth to the third column, and that's mass concrete that we are going for, because screed is always mass concrete. And then we go on to the column number 5, which is here as you follow the horizontal line. Here it's curved radii or other shaped. We mentioned that the example is a rectangular shape of screed, so we're going for other shaped. So what will be the code? It will be F, and then it will be foundation 2. So F2, then 1, here is well 1 and 2 are the shaped. So that's F2, 1, 1, 2, and that's the code for our example. So how to write the description? If you follow my method, you will be saying concrete works, semicolon, for foundation, semicolon, under screed with, you can state the thickness, you have to mention the thickness, which is 50 millimeters of thickness, semicolon, on mass concrete, semicolon, rectangular shape. If you want a grammatical method of description, you can say 50 millimeters of thickness on screed under the foundation section for concrete works with the shape of rectangular mass concrete. So you can just mark the order up and make it grammatically correct, and that is also a correct description method. So I hope you stayed along until this section of the video. So we are ending it. I hope you found the tips that I mentioned in between to be helpful, because I think it's really great, and it's a great way to not waste your time when you're taking off quantities. So make sure you get the unit first from the code itself, and then you take off the measurements, and then you go for the description. Some mistakes is to make sure you understand the horizontal lines, because some areas they have a column that is common, but then later on it's split on. So it's split on as it has been split on the first few columns. So make sure you don't make the mistake of going on to the top column itself as you're going for the part. That's wrong. You have to go for the specific horizontal line. And other mistakes that you can make in SLS 573 is kind of ignore the empty space in the column. So if the column number 5 is empty, you don't have to mention that in your coding. If a column number 2 or 3 is empty, you have to mention that as 0. So make sure, if for example it will be D1, if the next column is 0, then it will be D1 is 0. If there's an information on the next column, that will be 1. So it's D1 0 1. So make sure that you're mentioning it if it's within the first few columns. If it's the last column, you don't have to mention it. We just leave it empty, so the code just remains the same. So that's D1 1 1. We don't actually mention another section because it's empty, but if it's empty in the middle, you have to mention that as well. So make sure you don't make that mistake as well. And another thing is, I would recommend reading the measurement rules and the other 4 columns on the SLS 573 at the side. Make sure you kind of know if there's any information that you need to understand. Really good example is the side clearance and the side vegetation. So you have to mention the girth. So that if the girth's bigger than that, as according to the specification in your paper or something, and they mention it's a 600 millimeter section and it comes under side vegetation, you have to remember that 600 millimeter is bigger than 500, which means it's considered as a tree and not as a site vegetation shrub. So make sure you know all these things. Don't make silly mistakes when you're coming to reading SLS 573, because that's kind of the basic of what you need as you're taking off quantities. And I hope this video was really helpful for you guys, because I know a few people who are always struggling. I've had a few juniors come up to me and asking me to explain how to read SLS 573, and I hope my method of explaining really helps you guys to understand what you're reading and as you're learning your measurements in quantity surveying. So make sure you subscribe and like this video so it gets out to people and I can make more videos of this. And make sure you comment down below or share with your friends so they can have an understanding as well. I post a video once a week and I can't wait to see you in the next one.